Strict professor wants me to prove that I'm trying to improve my grades? I'll give her just that then. When I was a freshman in college, I had a maths teacher who was very strict about how she taught, and, more importantly, about how she expected us to learn. For example, she would force students to take notes, and if they didn't, she would make them leave. During our midterm exam, someone asked how much time was left, and she said 5 minutes. Now at this point, I was only about halfway done with the test, so I rushed and finished it barely in time. Me and most other students delivered the test and left the room. When I checked my phone, I realized that there was a whole other 20 minutes left. The students who hadn't finished in time told me that after we left, she realized that she'd read the clock wrong and gave them another 20 minutes that me and the others didn't have. I've always been pretty good at math, but obviously, after rushing half the test, I didn't get a good grade. The part I didn't rush was perfect, though. The next class, after showing us our results, she said that we needed to develop a strategy to improve our grades. She said that if we created a plan, stuck to it, and provided evidence of us doing it, she'd give us some extra credit. What she expected us to do was say something like, "I'll practice every week," and submit pictures of us doing it as evidence, or something like that. Now, while I didn't blame her for reading the clock wrong, I did blame the fact that I thought I only had 5 minutes left for not doing well on that last test. I was confident that I could have gotten a perfect grade on it if I had the extra 20 minutes. And so, what I said I would do is bring a watch to the next exam. Was it an arrogant thing to say? Yes. But I also thought it was stupid to follow along with her plan to micromanage our studies. She got mad at me and said that if I didn't do anything else, I'd fail the final for sure. But I assured her that the watch was enough for me to do better. A few months later, on the day of the final, I submitted a picture of a watch on my wrist as my evidence to sticking with the strategy. I got a perfect grade on the final. Since my strategy for improving my grades worked, she had to give me the extra credit, but not before arguing that I didn't deserve it, of course. Yeah, that was unfair for sure, although in fairness it seems like you may have been the case of a student who fell through the cracks of a problem that had worked for literally every other student in this case, rather than her being overwhelmingly complacent and unfair. I am kind of surprised that the post's author didn't even try to launch some kind of appeal if it mattered on something as important as a midterm test. You clearly had other classmates who could testify, and it seems like your teacher was fair or hamstrung enough to give you points on actually fulfilling the criteria of that extra credit. An unusual part of this is that your teacher does seem very dedicated to working with students who aren't doing as well, and actively taking steps to improve their students' grades. Then again, they don't seem very receptive to the idea that they might be wrong. Nonetheless, the teacher is 100% in the wrong for putting you in such a position for failure in the first place. And you have the actual proof in your resulting grades, and the satisfaction of getting extra credit for a mere picture of a wristwatch. Now, match that up with the hours of studying the rest of us had to do for extra credit in our bachelor's degrees, and you have the envy of the narrator and I'm sure lots of our viewers. Typical jerk neighbors complain about the truck in my yard, so I replace it. I live in a mostly quiet neighborhood with lots of snowbirds and weekenders because of the proximity to a lake. The year-rounders are mostly retired and people generally get along fine. A couple of years ago, however, neighbors on one side built a new garage and a driveway, moving their cars much closer to my existing forsythia hedge. I love the forsythia in the spring and basically let it grow however it likes so I can have the bright yellow flowers. Almost immediately, they started complaining that the hedge blocked their view as they backed out of their driveway. In my state, neighbors have no right to a view extending over someone else's property, and our Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that as long as trees and bushes don't actually impinge onto the roadway, property owners have no obligations to trim for visibility. I keep a 5-foot strip mowed between my hedge and the road, perfectly reasonable to my way of thinking. Since they have no recourse regarding the hedges, they instead complained to county code enforcement about anything else that they could think of. My brother parked his licensed and insured project truck on my property a while back because he was in the process of moving and needed a spot for it while he was figuring things out. In the meantime, he was in a bad accident in another vehicle, and the truck had been sitting for over a year in my driveway. The license plate recently expired, and the moment it did, I got a letter from the county with threats of fines if it wasn't removed. Cue the malicious compliance. My brother decided to sell the truck for scrap and had it towed away this morning. This gave my neighbors their temporary victory as they observed from their deck, and nearly 6 inches of improved view from their driveway. That was at least until I moved my second vehicle, a 1960 Lincoln, which is about 2 feet longer than the truck was, with current plates and insurance, into the place this afternoon. It already needs a ton of bodywork and it doesn't fit in my garage. As a single person with more than one vehicle, I may get around to driving that old car at least once more before winter. Old, bored, retired neighbors who have nothing better to do than complain about everything. They're right up there with HOA members for just seeming to live to make other people unhappy for things that just shouldn't matter to them. The fact that they waited and gathered enough facts to observe when a number plate expired speaks to just how much time and energy they were putting into this. Listeners, if this is you, get a hobby. You could probably learn to paint or knit an entire sweater in the amount of time you spend filling out forms or being on hold on the phone each year instead. Also, excellent passive-aggressive behavior from the author. It would only be improved if you took steps to make your mega vehicle even more of an eyesore. How about a hot pink paint job? Bumper stickers with expletives would probably go down really well with that crowd as well. And while you're at it, why not a pride flag? The kind of people who make these complaints probably love those. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for using some of my stepson's camp savings to buy replacement sneakers for my son? My son Chris's 16th birthday was weeks ago. His mum, my ex-wife, couldn't be with him due to work, but sent him a pair of Adidas sneakers as his birthday gift. Chris is a runner, and he enjoys running every day as a way to relieve stress and anxiety. My stepson Jake, age 17, saw the sneakers and said they looked like the ones his favorite artist, Kane Brown, was wearing in the Famous Friends music video, and so Jake got so hung up on them. He was always asking Chris to see them and try them on. Chris let him see them, but not wear them because Jake has bigger feet and he was worried he might ruin them. Jake wanted to wear the sneakers in front of his friends, but Chris didn't let him leave the house with them. Jake ended up sneaking out with them a couple of times, which made Chris hide them from him since he kept taking them without permission. Jake was no longer able to sneak out wearing the sneakers and begged Chris to let him wear them out one last time at a party his friends had had. Chris said no, and Jake somehow was able to locate the sneakers, but instead of going out with them, he just cut them up with a hand pruner and kept them in his room while Chris and I looked for them until his mum found them. Chris saw the damage and was upset. I grounded Jake and promised Chris to get a replacement pair, but when his mum called to tell me those sneakers were worth $600 and had to be replaced, I was in utter shock. I saw the receipt and even then I couldn't believe it because $600 is way more than I can afford. Chris's mum is a cardiologist and she can afford this stuff, but I obviously can't. I get why she was upset. She worked hard for the money to be able to buy those sneakers for his birthday. She has every right to expect them to be replaced. I was fuming. I let Jake know how much he messed up and told him I'll be replacing the sneakers using the money he had saved for his week-long summer camp. Jake had a meltdown and said he was already punished and it wasn't fair to punish him further. My wife thought I was exaggerating and talked about how important summer camp is for Jake, as he's been waiting for it for months. I let her know that Chris's mum is rightfully upset that her gift to him got ruined. And because Jake acted out of spite and maliciousness, then it's only fair he'd pay for the replacement. I'm not banning him from the camp, but the money I'm taking will cause him to miss it. His cousin's going too, but his parents are paying for the camp cost, so it's different. My wife assured me if Jake knew those sneakers were that expensive, he would have never touched them, but thought Chris wasn't letting him borrow them on purpose. What's done is done, and I made my decision final. Now both my wife and Jake are giving me the silent treatment and refusing to talk about it. My wife thinks it's crazy to spend $600 on new sneakers. I agree, but those aren't mine, so they need replacing. I guess I should acknowledge that because Chris's mum sends somewhat expensive items to Chris sometimes, Jake can sometimes feel jealous, which is understandable. But I make sure to treat both the boys equally by getting them equal stuff with my money. My wife thinks that Chris should be sharing with his brother, and he does, but there are things that just can't be shared. It's not just shoes, because Chris's mum sends expensive items to Chris. My wife thinks that Chris should be generous and share with his brother, which he does. He shares his Xbox and other things, but shoes aren't to be given for any reason, no matter how nice they looked. I think that Jake did have an idea how expensive the sneakers were, since he mentioned that they looked like the ones Kane Brown wore in the music video. Another thing is that Chris's mum is upset over what happened, and she has every right to be. $600 is a lot, and even though I personally wouldn't or couldn't spend that much on sneakers, it's her money that she worked for. So I think it's fair to be expecting a replacement. Even if he didn't know, which probably isn't the case, he should have never under any circumstances deliberately vandalized his brother's stuff. That was his brother's birthday gift. So, am I the jerk? Yeah, this sounds like Jake was the jerk here, with the usual caveat that he's a teenager and most people are at that age. But although some of us, the narrator included, have engaged in petty vandalism of a sibling's property, most of us can't claim to cause $600 worth of damage while doing so. Honestly, I'm amazed that a 17-year-old had that much money of his own to pay for summer camp with. So good on Jake in that respect for being a good little saver. But yeah, given everything his stepdad has said, it seems pretty likely that this was a very deliberate and calculated destruction of something monetarily and emotionally important to his stepbrother. It's really, really brutal to lose that amount of money, especially if he'd presumably been working a fair bit to save it all up, but this is a learning moment right here. Revenge is pointless, expensive, and will only land you in a worse place than you began, and rarely makes you feel better. Especially if the revenge is for not being able to wear sneakers to a party? You're not medically qualified. I work in a prison, and working in a prison means a responsibility to ensure the well-being of inmates. As expected, this includes medical needs. Anything you'd see a doctor for, the inmates would as well. The procedure would be to send a medical kite, or letter, to medical with concerns, symptoms, etc., and a request to be seen. For a true emergency, chest pains, trouble breathing, an inmate can declare a medical emergency. This is the equivalent of calling emergency services. When the medical emergency is requested, a radio call is made with the location, nature of the emergency, and the requested type of service needed, such as facility medical staff, custody staff, and outside medical services. When a medical emergency, or code, is called, the facility is locked down, meaning no movement for the inmates. Lunch being served? Sorry, you'll have to wait while this code is going on. Time for you to go to work? Sorry, you're going to lose some pay until this code is clear. As expected, there are incarcerated individuals that are not all that mentally stable. They'll declare a medical emergency for a stubbed toe or a heartburn. Now, as a regular person, I'm aware a hurt toe is not a medical emergency, so I, and many others, would advise the inmate to kite medical and request to be seen. This system seemed to work for a long time until the administration began to receive complaints from the inmates that staff were ignoring the requests to declare medical emergencies. "You're not medically trained," was the answer we received when we tried to explain the reason for ignoring these, quote, medical emergencies. "Do your job and declare the medical emergencies." Okay. Message received loud and clear. Over the next week, medical emergencies went from 1 a day to 3 to 4 a day. Inmate has a stubbed toe? Medical emergency. Constipated? Medical emergency. Itchy butt? Medical emergency. You get the point. The facility was paralyzed. Medical was mad because they had to respond to every call. Food services were mad because a meal that took an hour to serve was now 2 to 3 hours. The inmates were really mad because their yard and gym time were gone. A week later to the day, an emailed directive was received to stop declaring medical emergencies and to use our judgment. A few staff members kept it going for another week until it faded out. There was no "sorry for the inconvenience" or "you were right," but the email was so satisfying to receive. Honestly, I would have emailed right back with the previous instructions and outright asked which set of conflicting recent directions you were required to follow, and ask if there'd been a mix-up. Not because it would help anything or because I was genuinely confused, just for the sweet satisfaction of making them admit they were wrong. Admittedly, they will probably do so in the least direct way that they possibly can, but what can the narrator say? He's a petty and vengeful human who enjoys this kind of thing. Keep your receipts, forward them back reminding them they caused the problem, and cackle evilly to yourself and savor the victory. Or, be the bigger person and get on with your life. That doesn't sound nearly as fun though. And yes, some of you are probably fairly pointing out that in the last story I waxed lyrical about revenge being pointless and petty and never coming to any good. But I'm a bad person. I'm just trying to teach the rest of you how to be better than me. Sounds like management fell prey to the classic problem of not trusting the people who were on the ground dealing with the issue, and of course, suffered the consequences. Am I the jerk for what I said after my husband commented on my flat chest? My husband Jared and I have been married for 3 years. He's currently out of work, used to work at a high-paying job, but got kicked out of the company over a fight with a co-worker, and I'm the one paying for rent and utilities. We dedicate some time to see his family weekly. They don't know he's unemployed because he thought they'll see him as a failure, especially his mum, so he told me to keep it a secret. I make sure to tell him to look for a job every day, but he keeps stalling, and I've been fed up for a while because I've been carrying the load by myself, while he keeps saying he needs time to prepare for work again after what happened with his co-worker. Last night we were sitting eating dinner at the table. His cousin was talking about his fiancée going to Brazil to get a chest job. Jared asked if he was serious, then flattered his future sister-in-law's chests, saying they're perfect, and he didn't understand why she'd get that kind of job done. He then turned to me, stared at my chest while I was eating, like an idiot. I have a flat chest, I'm insecure about it, but I can't do anything about it, obviously, and he said, "Hey, why don't you get one of those? You're the one who needs it the most." His mum gasped and was like, "Jared." I said, "It's fine." I then turned to him and said, "I'll get a chest job once you get an actual job since you've been unemployed for 6 months now." He stared at me in disbelief. His mum began questioning him about his unemployment and he denied, but then admitted it was true. It got awkward with his mum scolding him and others shaming him for it and for hiding it. He got so overwhelmed he went outside and stayed inside the car until I came out. Although I felt like I went too far for telling his family, it's the truth. Also, he didn't have an argument with his former co-worker, but rather a months-long fight. He told me that he thought his co-workers were being unethical, but I got told that he, my husband, violated the co-worker's privacy to snoop on him, and it resulted in a fight and him getting kicked out of the company. He started yelling at me in the car, "You couldn't have held your effing tongue," and accused me of turning his family against him and having them judge him, then shun him, and now he can't even step a foot in their house from shame and guilt. I argued that his comment about my chest was insulting, but he said he was only giving me a piece of advice and that there was nothing wrong with him wanting me to look pretty, and that he said what he said out of support and encouragement. But what I did was the complete opposite, and that it was intended to hurt him, and I succeeded. He dropped me off at home and then went to stay with his buddies. I called him later thinking he had calmed down, but his friend said he didn't want to speak to me and I should give him space. He's acting like I'm the one who messed up and needs to apologize. To be frank, I didn't intend on telling his family about his unemployment, but I felt attacked and didn't know what to do. Yeah, this one has some layers, as it kinda seems like the author and their partner had quite a few bubbling issues under the surface. 6 months of unemployment and a feeling that your partner isn't doing anything to better their situation is likely going to cause some resentment, and almost certainly contributed to the author's outburst. I wouldn't say that their behavior was commendable, but ultimately the husband effed around and subsequently found out. That's a bold move for someone who's been fired for his behavior and is financially dependent on you. When I first read that part of the story, I thought that maybe he'd said it in a jokey spirit, but it turns out that later in the story he completely believes it. What a jerk. And pulling that out at a family dinner kind of worsened the offense too. The things he was fired for also imply that he was probably prone to being pretty lousy in how he treats people in general. While the author probably isn't a jerk, he almost certainly is. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.